Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We are so excited for this episode because I get the privilege and honor to introduce one of my awesome friends that I met out here in the great state of Texas. And she's awesome. She is filled with the Spirit of God, and her story is so incredible. So, without further ado, I'd love to introduce my great friend, Avery. Hello. She is going to be sharing her story, and we're just gonna, have an open conversation, Laurie, Avery, and I, just about her testimony. So, Avery, if you want to just start off with telling us a little bit about like where you come from, like your background, your childhood, kind of like the beginning,
Okay.
from what you remember with your faith journey.
Well, I grew up in Sugar Land, Texas. My parents were divorced, so I kind of went back and forth between Sugar Land and like Mission Bend area. I always grew up in the church. My father was very religious, I would say more than my mother. So I typically went to church with him. When I thought of growing up as a Christian, I thought of my relationship with him. Um, when I first started being more like into my faith and like practicing, I definitely had like a strong love for God when I was little. And then as I got older and as I was obviously developing into a teenager and going to high school, I started to kind of fall out of it and started to just like be in the ways of the world. I didn't have great influences with friends and started partying a lot and just started like being out of it totally. And so I just felt like I grew up really religious at first and then kind of like I was thinking of it as a religion.
Right.
And, yeah.
So that's what my question was going to be is
Yeah.
like you mentioned the word religion a few times, religious. That's how it felt to you. It felt religious. It felt like
a chore.
Like a chore.
Yeah.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when I just was in my like disobedience era, kind of just like, okay, well, if I have to do this, this, and this, and like I have to act this, this, and this way, like if I couldn't measure up to that, then like I just thought that I wasn't good enough. And that like I'm never gonna be there. Like I remember always thinking of myself like I'm never gonna be like my dad, like going to church, giving, worshiping. Like I look at the people around me and they like are on their knees with their hands up, and I'm like, I don't feel like that. Like, of course I was, in like middle school and I didn't understand it, but I was just like, this looks so like, just like an act to me. It looked like an act again, because like I wasn't practicing it. I didn't understand like the full love of God. So I ended up just not really going to church anymore. And when I did, I wouldn't pay attention. I would fall asleep in the chair. And I had no discipline on listening either. I started going with my mom, and I just had no discipline of practicing every other 6 days of the week. Yeah. So after that, after like being in that stage of not really following God, and just like being, I guess, bored of it and just like led astray, like I was like, okay, like there's not much for me to do with this. There's not much for me to like go, like I can't go anywhere with this. I didn't feel like I was going to go anywhere with that. So then that's when I took things into my own hands, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start doing other things to like fulfill happiness, you know, that they're talking about. So that's when I started getting into just hanging out with the wrong types of people, doing the wrong types of thing on the weekends, getting in the wrong relationships, speaking the wrong words. And I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself.
No. You're
Um,
good.
yeah. So a little bit about my testimony. I'm not really ashamed to tell people about it.
Right.
I know that it wasn't, you know, it's pretty bad. It wasn't like when I think of where I was versus where I am now, like I completely think I'm just like a different person. And I'm comfortable with sharing my testimony because I know that that's not my identity now.
Yeah.
That's not, you know, who I used to be. Just shows where God has brought me, like from so far.
Oh, that's so
I
good.
went from smoking weed, drinking alcohol, partying every weekend, having sex, cussing, blasphemy. I mean, there was jokes that I would make about God, about religion, just like completely being so sucked into the world. And it was so easy for it too. Like I just would be on my phone and scrolling on Instagram, scrolling on TikTok, thinking nothing of God, like absolutely nothing. He wouldn't even pop into my head during the day. And then I think it took me coming out of a relationship to really be like, oh, like wake up call. You know, I was
Right.
like snapped back into, okay, that way that I was living really isn't where I want to be. And I mean, we can share that a bit later, but at that moment, that's when he really like
Woke you up.
got my attention.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow.
Wow.
No, that is a good place. So what, because I think the listeners want to know, like, what was that switch? What happened that caused you to realize, wait a minute, this is I'm taking the wide path. I'm on the wide path that leads to destruction. What made you open your eyes and say, wait a minute, this isn't the path I want to be on?
So it was when I got out of a year relationship that I was in, I thought that that relationship was just so perfect for me. I was so happy, you know, he would never do anything to hurt me. I thought that, you know, we were gonna like spend the rest of our lives together, blah, blah, blah. I was in my junior year of high school, I think. Yeah. And we had broken up because he had cheated on me. And so I went into a like long period of depression. Like I was in denial. I was so hurt. I was like, he was my everything. Like, you know, he was my God.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I was like, he was my life. And when we broke up, like I was just like, okay, well, this is it for me. Like I have no hope. Like I was just in a strong stage of depression. And at the time I was going to a church in Sugar Land, but I was just going to Sunday service, so I wasn't doing anything extra. And my mom saw how bad it got, and she was like, she almost said something about taking me to a hospital, and then she was like, no, like you need to go to church, like you need to go to a counselor. And at the time I was like, that's not what I wanted to hear. I was like, I don't need to go to church. So I ended up agreeing. I went to church because like there's always a spark in me where I felt like the love of God, and I knew that he was always with me, but I just wasn't like open to like receiving it. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm hopeless. So like if I have to try something, then I'll try it. So I went and I talked to a counselor there, and she was really just helping me like identify like the whole relationship. I opened up to her about like how I was with him, like, you know, how I was like having sex with him and all that stuff. And she suggested me to go to a youth group. So it was for like high school kids. And at the time, like I was kind of like, no, I don't really want to go. Like, I don't want people to like know who I am. Like, they're going to know what I've done. Cause like when you're in high school, like people talk.
Right.
So
yeah.
I was like, they probably know me. They probably know what I've done. but I ended up going anyways, and it was great actually because it was just a group of 5 girls. And we were all in the same grade, and we had all like gone through like a lot of the same stuff. And we would talk about, we would do Bible study, and then we would just be vulnerable with each other. And I think at one point I finally opened up about my past, about like how I was behaving. And I just felt like sisterhood, you know, like I felt like, okay, they're not going to judge me. They're not going to like tell me like I'm a bad person, you know, you shouldn't be doing this, and just like look at me differently. And then that's when I finally started to do stuff at home. I started to pray. I started to do my devotionals. I started to just learn more about him and who he was, from the word, not from what like, you know, my father told me or what my mother told me. Or,
getting to know God, like
yeah.
for God, and not what other people presented him as to you.
Yeah.
He's your God, not your mom or your dad's God.
Exactly. You know? Yeah. So a lot of that helped. A lot of that went into my devotionals because I didn't know where to start in the Bible. I didn't really read like that. So I started doing devotionals, and a lot of it was like for depression and loneliness and like hopelessness. And that's when I was like, okay, like I feel safe. Like I feel like he's got me and he's got a future for me.
Yes.
And that's when I started to build hope, and I started to build a relationship with him. When instead of going to a therapist or going to YouTube videos, how to get over your boyfriend, or even advice from your friends, because like that advice wasn't from the word of God. Like it was worldly ways of getting over your ex-boyfriend. And over time, I just began to like heal from it, like in ways that like I couldn't even explain. Like I just was content and okay with it. And I forgave him for it, actually. Like I was like, wow, I thought that I would never like overcome this feeling of like sadness and resentment and like anger. And to now, like I'm just like walking in freedom and like walking in his light. Like I felt like, okay, like he has that person set for me. Like I had a whole new area of hope. And then over time, I noticed that that was just me leaning on him because I was sad from a relationship. So I felt like I think he like convicted me a little and was like, why do you only come to me when you're feeling lonely, or when you feel like, you know, like you need a word about relationships? And I was like, I felt so bad because I was like, dang, you're right. Like I only come to you when like I need relationship advice. And like I'm not coming to you for like all these other areas in my life that I need help with. I was an angry person. I was a jealous person. I was still falling back into the ways of my old, like my past. I was still cursing, hanging out with the wrong people. Like he might have fixed my relationship part, my mindset about relationships, but I didn't even come to him for everything else. And I just assumed that, you know, it was all going to fall together and eventually I'll be like this Christian girl. But in the back of my head, I was like, I'm never going to be like that girl. Like I'm never going to like come out of these addictions, because it was addictions. It was stuff that I would think about, I'd feel bad about, but I would go ahead and do it because like my flesh wanted it. And so that's another story of when I like separated myself from that group of people, that area, that community, and just being like, I wouldn't say pure. Well, I am pure.
You are.
That's when I felt like, okay, I'm finally in the area that I want. I'm not perfect, but God is constantly doing a work on me, and I'm learning how to obey him more. And, you know, I see like the light in that. Like when I do, like I see what it produces. Yeah.
That was going to be my next question. So as he has changed you on in the unseen, what are some of the things you've seen in the seen realm, like where you can actually see it?
Sorry, I didn't hear you. What are some things that
have changed, like you can see now in your life Because he has been changing you on the inside. What has changed on the outside because of it?
Well, first, it all started when I moved from Houston to Magnolia. That literally all fell into place. Like that was God's work of how it played out, because I was literally searching for a house that month to continue living with my roommate at the time. And just like living my life in Houston, like I had no interest in moving outside of it. And when my mom was like, come move to Magnolia, I was like, oh God, like I'm not like this country girl that like, I'm not like the super Christian country girl. And that's what everybody is out here, which is great. Like I knew in the back of my head, that's the community I needed to be around. But at the time I was like,
You're like, I'm not that.
I'm not that right now. And so it all worked out. Literally graduated and then moved to Magnolia. I got a job down here that was, oh my gosh, that was literally played out by God. Like how I got that job was just insane. That's another story. But it was from him, I know for sure. It worked out perfectly. And then I just started to see my life change. Like my mom, I didn't have like a great relationship with, because again, I was like an angry person and I was just like always finding something to like, piss me off and like have the victim mentality. And moving back in with her really helped me work those things out, because that was an area in my life that I really struggled with, was like, why am I such an angry person? Like I would talk to God, like, why do I always feel so angry? Like I'd pray to him, like nothing's happening, like and he's like, girl, you're not doing the work, like you're not trying to overcome this, you need to spend more time with your mom, like I put you here in this season for a reason, this is your growing season. And over time, I just like my relationship with my mom was like so much better. And I got baptized. And after that, like my whole family was like, she's literally a new girl. Like I know that like it's a visual representation of your faith. But like since then, since I like publicly put it out there that I am saved, that I'm a child of God, that's when like I was like, okay, everything in my life is changing. Like I just feel like a more content person. What's the word? When you're like more easy about things, like I wasn't so like triggered about certain things, and I would let things go. I would forgive people. And that kind of just brought like me to surround myself with a community. Like I was finally open to going to like Bible studies on Tuesdays, Mondays, Wednesdays with youth groups. Like finally that when I was open to being around those groups of people and being around the community, that's when I started feeling like the fellowship. Like I started like, okay, I can have these friends. Like they support me. Like Taylor supports me so much and she helps me so much. And like, I never had friends like that. And so when I felt like our friendship, I was like, this is so weird. Like, why is she checking me? I was like, why is she so concerned with how I feel? And it was so like, just abnormal to me. It was so like unrecognizable. I was like, I never felt like this is what loving your neighbor is. Like, like even if you know that they're like in the wrong or in the right, like you support them either way and you're there to like help them and pray with, like you pray over me and stuff. And like, it just completely changes your community. The people around you just completely changes like who you are. Yeah,
that's true. So on that point, I remember you telling me a little while back about like kind of like when we first started talking, you mentioned that you used to be very self-absorbed.
Oh yeah.
Like all you did was talk about yourself, your relationship, like what's going on with you. So elaborate more on that, because I think that's a pretty cool like transformation that a lot of people are in that place where they're like very self-absorbed, like it's about me.
Yeah.
But whenever you experience the love of the Father and like you're changed from within, like everything changes, like
Your
in the
perspective.
external. Yeah.
My perspective definitely changed a lot. I didn't notice it at first that I was so self-absorbed until I had some people even just call me out and be like, you just talked about yourself. Like, you didn't even ask a question about me. And I was like, oh, you're right. I didn't. But not just like, it didn't just come from me talking with other people to realize, but I think that I was like idolizing myself in a way, like thinking of myself as like better than other people, but in a specific way. Like my personality, I was almost like fantasizing it. And I don't know where that came from and why it came on me, but I was like, this feels wrong. Like I remember every single time I would feel so self-absorbed and like just like completely like in love with myself in a way, I'd be like, oh, this doesn't feel right. Like this doesn't feel like this is not something that I'm supposed to be doing right now. You know, like I know you're supposed to love yourself, but like I was idolizing myself in ways that wasn't of God.
Right. Yeah.
I like work out a lot, so my body was one of them. And that is still a work in progress because it takes time to like completely shift my head from that. But there's definitely been a lot of work from it. God has put like on my heart, like, this isn't about you.
Right.
You know, your body isn't, it doesn't identify you, and it's not what gets you into heaven. You're not even going to have this body in heaven, you know, like he almost convicted me of like, you have this body and you're showing off this body for other people's validation. And then it struck me and I was like, my idolism of myself is for other people's validation. And I almost started competing because of it, competing in bikini bodybuilding. And really quick, my mind was changed because I was like thinking about it. And I was like, okay, if I put in all this work to do this show, what am I getting out of it? Because I'm literally starving myself, working out when I don't want to, probably not going to be natural, going to be on drugs. I'd probably end up being on anabolic steroids to level up to the girls that are at the top of the chain.
Right.
And I was like, I don't think that's worth it anymore. Like, I'd get on stage and I'm comparing myself to other people and I'm letting judges tell me if I'm worthy or not. And I was like, there's only one person who tells me I'm worthy, and that's God. Like, I don't need anybody else's opinion or validation to tell me who I am.
Wow.
And I started just changing my mindset of like, me working out is because God gave me the ability to. Like, this is something that makes me healthy and it makes me feel good, and I simply enjoy working out, and that's what it needs to stay in. Not because, wow, I'm gonna have like massive glutes and a 6-pack, like, you know, like that's not what it's about for me anymore. And I think that was probably the biggest alter in my life, because that was something that I thought my mindset's always going to be on that.
Right.
I'm always going to think this way about my body. This is always going to be a part of my life. Like, you know, nothing's going to change that. And I would see like TikToks about girls who like fell out of bodybuilding because of that. And I was like, yeah, it couldn't be me. And then now we're like, look at where I am. I'm like, yeah, literally not me.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to be me.
Right.
I like that you brought the whole thing about validation. And that's funny because I like how God aligns things. Because just this week, him and I were discussing validation. And so validation is a worldly thing. The world is trying to convince you that you must be validated for who you are. But meanwhile, God has already validated you.
He tells you who your identity is.
Exactly.
And
so
it's
I love
in
that
him.
you brought that up. Yeah.
Because we're created in his image. So
yeah,
like we
You're
have
already
such
validated.
an identity.
Yeah,
We have such an identity crisis in our world today.
We
like
do.
For real. And
people don't know who they want to be and who they are. And that's why, you know, they get so confused as they're looking for something to make them feel like themselves, and they just run to all these different options instead of, you need to go to the word and really read about who you are. And then that's where you can find your true identity.
Right. Yeah. And I
Be
love,
content.
yeah, because there's so many ways. Like we could think of like the most extreme case of like an identity crisis. Like it's obvious, like you visibly see it, like, wow, they have an identity crisis going on, right? But like that kind of like takes our focus off, and maybe in like a more judgment perspective, right? From like the church or from just the world of like, okay, well, what about your identity crisis and the way you feel, when you work out, the way you feel you look when you work out, or all that effort that you put into this job for that title, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you have an identity crisis if your worth is based on your work,
Wow.
right? So there's so many other ways that we all have, we have an identity crisis, that it's not just the most extreme case, just those certain people, right? There's so many other ways that you're struggling with your identity because it's not in God's image.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like the verse about, the splinter in your neighbor's eye, but there's a big wood log in your eye. Like, you are so quick to just like judge and, like, oh wow, they have something really going on with them. And it's like, okay, how can you reflect on yourself? Like, you're not in that place to judge them, and not everybody is perfect. And there are little things that need to be worked on.
Yeah. But we also at the same time are called to uplift our brothers and sisters in Christ, right? Finding that balance in like the judgment that we're called to.
Yeah.
Like you said, like we have to remove the plank from our eye before we can remove the splinter from our brother or sister's eye, right? Yeah. So like getting clear on where you are to then be able to go and uplift them in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's also a difference too between pointing something out in judgment versus pointing something out in love, because we're called to love. We're not called to judge. And unfortunately, many people out there are so busy judging. And the reason they do that is because they're so busy judging themselves. Because when you judge yourself, then you're always judging others, because then it's almost like kind of like a competition. Like, I feel really judgmental about this about myself. So in that way, I'm going to look at you over here so I don't feel quite so judgmental about myself. It's always going to come back to you.
So you don't feel as bad about, what you've been struggling with. That you can just point out like, wow, look at them. Look at how deep they've gotten.
Yeah. They fell off the deep end.
Yeah. And then a lot of times like that kind of puts a bad taste in non-believers' mouths, because you're supposed to represent the kingdom. You're supposed to represent God, and God is love. He's the only one who can judge. And your goal on earth is to simply love others. Bible says it plain and simple, love others. It doesn't say judge others, hate others, condemn others. Like, it doesn't say that.
Yeah. So, hate the sin, not the person. Right. And so we can make that clear, like, hey, like, obviously, like, I'm not in support of this thing, right? Whatever it is, but I love you. And like, I'll be here to pray for you and lift you up, and, praying behind their back, not talking about them behind their back.
Yeah. Or even, just like accepting it too.
Right.
I think like a lot of people just accept people, like their friends and stuff. They just accept it, and they don't, what's the word? They don't bring it up. Yeah. They don't talk to them about it out of love, and they just let them believe the lie. Right. And then it's like, like, do you want to help save them? Do you want to tell them the word of God and like encourage them, or just like, let them believe it forever?
Right. Cause that's not love.
Yeah.
Right.
Cause the same thing.
God does that to us. Like his love is perfect. It's unconditional. And sometimes it's the hammer. Sometimes it's not, oh, I just accept you for all your, I just accept all these sins, right? He accepts us,
not our sins,
not these sins. And that's why Jesus died for us, so that it's washed clean. He sees us as he sees Jesus, but he also will convict us and be like, look, this isn't going to serve you. And it's the same way. I love you so much that I don't want to see you continue to struggle with this,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much for you on the other side.
Yeah.
Like God has so much abundance for you on the other side of this that's like hindering you and holding you back.
And that's where I really feel like that my testimony, that I really feel unashamed to share my testimony, is because I know that a lot of people suffered with what I suffered with. And if I could be like a little bit of encouragement of, hey, I was here, like literally in the deepest end, and he pulled me out, like there's so much hope for you. And all you have to do is just ask him to be your Lord and Savior and believe in Jesus, like, and follow him and practice it. And like, I tell people, like, he gives you a choice. You can deny him, or you can figure out what all of this is about and follow him, and he will lead it from there, and he'll show you who he is if you're just open to receive it.
I love this point because Laurie, you've mentioned this, and I'm seeing the similarities here. I think with a lot of people's testimonies is him walking into those dark places with you and walking you out, right? Like he'll lead you back out of the tunnel with the light. He's the light. He's our lamp. And so when I think about your testimony, Avery, I see very vividly the areas where God was in the deep end with you. And even when he knew like you weren't gung-ho for him, right? You weren't like, oh, I love Jesus. Like, I'm, let go of this whole lifestyle. Like you were still stuck
Holding
in some
on.
worldly ways, and he was still right there with you. Like
he was, and he
holding your
was
hand.
showing me the entire time that he was there with me. Like he would show me signs and confirmation, and I would just blow it off my shoulder and ignore it because I was like, I thought it was the universe. I was like, like I didn't believe in like God showing me his presence. So obviously I wasn't open to receive it.
Right.
And then I look back now and I'm like, wow, he really was there with me when I was doing the worst of the worst. Like, he never left me. He was there the entire time, just by my side. Like, whenever you're ready, come to me. And then, he finally showed me. And
especially in that season of double-mindedness, right? Like, because that's even tougher. Lukewarm, right?
Oh, that was tough.
Because he's like, okay, you know who I like, you know what I'm about, but you're still dabbling. But I still love you, and I'm still here. Like that is so much mercy, so much love for him to do that, where we see it, like we know him, but we're still dabbling, and living two different lives, and like he still loves us through that, and he knew what was on the other side of it for you.
I think that too is something that confuses people sometimes, is because God cannot be near sin. So God cannot go in there with you, but Jesus took all of your sin. He's already experienced every sin that ever was or will ever be all at one time. So he can go in. And I think that's part of the reason why God uses us. He takes us out, Jesus takes us out of our sin, because now we've been in it. We can go back in it and get other people out. That's what we're called to do. Because once we've already found the way out, then now we can walk right in and lead people right back out. If they're willing to follow.
I love that. That's so good. Well, if you could give like Avery like a word like to describe like where you are with Jesus right now, with God, like, when you think about these certain seasons of your life and you can like see that comparison, like you once were blank, you now are blank. How would you fill in those blanks?
I would say I once was, I wouldn't say I felt alone, but I wouldn't say that I was alone. I would say confused is the biggest word for me. I was once confused, and now everything is just clear. Like, I just feel like all of those lies that I was being told, they all came to truth. Like, they all came to light, and like I fully understand the truth in them and what was being played in my past. Why, like, I was letting in things that didn't have any authority of being in my life. Like, and I didn't recognize it. So that's why I felt so confused. And just like dark. Like I just felt dark and like there's no hope. And like, what does this universe have for me? I literally remember thinking like, what is my purpose in life? Like, why am I even alive? Where's the hope? And now I see a future. There's a lot of words that I can say, but it's just like darkness to light, like hopelessness to hope. Just my faith has grown so much stronger from where I was. I mean, I believed in God, but I didn't believe in the works that he would do for people.
Right.
Especially, when he wants to pull you out and when he was waiting for you and the love. I didn't understand the love of God is what I say. I didn't understand how deep it was. I was like, oh yeah, Jesus loves me, died for my sins on the cross, like blah, blah,
Jesus
blah.
loves me.
Yes,
I know.
Literally felt like a kiddie church, and to like fully understanding like, wow, he really suffered on a cross just for my sins. And like, I don't know, just the love of God was amplified reading in the Bible and really reading what it meant. Yeah. And everything that came with it too. It was almost like too much for me to like understand at once, because I was like, how can he love me that much? Like after everything that I've done, like how can he? And then everything would just tie together and then I would understand it. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, do you have any final words that you want to share, Laurie, or question or?
No, the only thing that keeps popping into my head, because we have wide is the way that leads to destruction, and a lot of people are on there and they think, ooh, yay. And then the verse about narrow is the way that leads to life. And we look at it because the perception is it's narrow. Yes, because there is only one way, and that's Jesus. But the thing is, once you get to Jesus, that narrow path, you just opened up everything. Because everything that God owns, which is everything, all of his abundance is now yours. So those that might be thinking, that narrow way, that just seems too strict and too confining, is actually the greatest freedom you will ever know when you step into it.
Wow. That's awesome. Yay. Well, go ahead. What'd you say?
I was going to say, like, when I was visualizing the narrow road, I just visualized like once you hit Jesus and understand, like walking in his presence, I just saw like spread out roads to everything. It's like everything that you do in your daily life is in his presence and for his glory. Like you don't have to go, you can do certain things that you used to do and completely change the way that you did them before, and just be walking in like love. Every gift that he gave you and every feeling and emotion that he gives you can glorify him. And there's just so like, you don't have to walk down this little narrow road your entire life and just be like, okay, I have to obey God, I have to go to church, I have to like a religious mindset,
right?
And like you can spread out, you can do things that show the whole world who Jesus really is and who you're representing,
right? Because God is not the church, right? It's not like, oh, this means my whole life's committed to just being at the church every day of my life.
I'm going to stay to myself. I don't have to share anything. I don't have to encourage others. I don't have to serve. Like, just thinking like, if I do this, this, and this, I go to heaven.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that.
Yeah. And I don't have to live in the world. It's like, no, we are living in the world, but we're not of this world. And so that's exactly what Jesus exemplified to us when he was here on earth, sitting with the sinners, eating with the sinners, just having these encounters, these miraculous encounters, that he's called us to do the same, as he's equipping us down the road. Like you said, like those little branches on that narrow path, he's like, okay, we're going to go over here, like grab my hand. We're going to go here and we're going to sit with these people.
Yeah.
And,
we're going to eat with these people, and you're going to give money and give words even to these people, encourage them. It's like, you don't have to just stick to yourself and think it's all about you and Jesus. It's about other people too. You have to love on other people.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, thank you so much, Avery, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Grace and Glory. It was such a great episode. And we hope that you guys just, maybe you relate to Avery's story. Maybe you're in that season of darkness and, you know, you're really just looking for light. Like, I believe 100% that God led you to this episode for a reason, because he wanted you to hear, you know, the truth, and that if, you know, he could pull people like us and like Avery's story out of darkness and out of that hopelessness and into hope, into light, he will do it for you because he loves you just as much. And so we thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we look forward to having you listen to our next episode.